He was the student every teacher gave up on. The one every university rejected. They told him he would never amount to anything, that his dreams were a joke. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't just reject a student, they unleashed a future titan. This is the story of how the most rejected person in the room built a billion-dollar empire from a single, burning no. The envelope was heavy, its thick, creamy paper a stark contrast to the flimsy rejections that had preceded it. Crestview University. Leo's last hope. His heart hammered against his ribs as he slid his thumb under the flap, the sound echoing in the silent emptiness of his foster home. He saw the words first not as sentences, but as weapons. After careful review, we regret to inform you, not a fit for our academic community. The world narrowed to that single, devastating phrase. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a final verdict on his worth. That night, the silence in his small room was deafening, broken only by the hum of his second-hand computer. The glowing screen displayed a complex coding problem he'd been trying to solve for weeks, a digital fortress he couldn't breach. He looked from the screen to the crumpled letter on the floor, the two images merging in his mind. A fortress, a locked door, a new, terrifying, and exhilarating thought began to form. If they wouldn't let him in, he would build his own kingdom. Mr. Cruz, ambition is not a substitute for aptitude. Mr. Havisham's voice was like gravel, his eyes cold behind his spectacles. He hadn't even looked up from his grade book when Leo had asked, one final time, for a recommendation letter. Your projects are fanciful. A university needs disciplined minds, not dreamers. Perhaps a trade school would be a more realistic path. Each word was a carefully placed needle, designed to deflate. Leo stood there, the shame burning his cheeks, feeling smaller with each passing second. He walked out of the school, the sound of the final bell feeling like a death knell. His peers streamed past him, chatting about dorms and majors, their futures a bright, mapped-out certainty. Leo felt like a ghost, already forgotten. But then, a strange calm settled over him. Havisham was wrong. The system was wrong. They saw his failure to conform as a lack of discipline, but it was their system that lacked vision. The rejection was no longer a wound, it was a badge of honor. He was free. The garage was a tomb of forgotten dreams, filled with the scent of oil, dust, and damp concrete. It was the only space Mrs. Gable, his weary foster mother, could offer him rent-free for a few months. Leo stood in the center, the single bare bulb overhead casting long shadows. This was it. His laboratory, his office, his university. He wiped the grime from an old workbench, the surface scarred and stained, and placed his laptop upon it like a knight laying a sword upon an altar. His first purchase was a large whiteboard, paid for with the last of his savings from his grocery store job. That night, under the weak glow of the bulb, he drew a single line down the center. On one side, he wrote, "Their path." On the other, "MY path." Under their path, he listed, degree, debt, approval, limits. Under MY path, he wrote just one word, in bold, capital letters, build. It was the most terrifying and empowering moment of his life. The grind, as online forums called it, was a brutal teacher. Days blurred into nights, measured not by the sun but by the completion of coding modules and the solving of algorithmic puzzles. He lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, his only companions the silent, glowing lines of code on his screen. Failure was a constant companion. Programs crashed, logic failed, and bugs emerged like ghosts in the machine. Each setback was a fresh echo of Havisham's voice, a whisper that he was indeed a fanciful dreamer. But with each problem solved, a tiny ember of confidence glowed brighter. He wasn't just learning to code, he was learning resilience. He was developing a relationship with failure, no longer seeing it as a verdict but as a necessary step in the process. He learned to debug not just his programs, but his own mindset. The garage, once a tomb, was becoming a forge, and he was both the blacksmith and the metal, being tempered in the fire of his own ambition. He called it Aether, a name suggesting something omnipresent yet intangible. The idea was born from his own loneliness. an AI that could seamlessly integrate with any digital system, not to replace human connection, but to facilitate it by managing the tedious, allowing people to focus on the meaningful. It started as a simple aggregator of his social feeds and calendar, but it quickly grew more complex, learning his habits, predicting his needs. It was the digital friend he wished he had. For months, Aether was his sole focus. He poured every ounce of his knowledge, his frustration, and his hope into its code. He talked to it, tested it, and refined it. It was more than a project. It was his thesis, his proof of concept to a world that had rejected him. The night Aether first successfully autonomously scheduled his week, prioritizing his work and reminding him to eat, Leo felt a surge of accomplishment greater than any A+ grade. He had created something that worked. Impressive, but it's just a fancy personal assistant. The investor, a man in a sharp suit named Mr. Sterling, leaned back in his leather chair, unimpressed. Leo had scraped together his courage and a decent shirt for this, his first pitch. The market is saturated. What makes your little app so special? Leo fumbled through his explanation about intuitive learning and adaptive architecture, but he could see Sterling's eyes glazing over. The meeting ended with a handshake and a "we'll be in touch," which Leo now knew was the business world's version of "we regret to inform you." He left the sleek high-rise feeling the same hollow ache he'd felt leaving Havisham's office. The language was different, the furniture more expensive, but the message was the same: you are not enough. He walked through the bustling city, watching successful people stride purposefully to their next meetings. He had believed building a great product was enough. He was wrong. He needed to learn a new language, the language of power, persuasion, and packaging. The library became his new campus. He devoured books on venture capital, business strategy, and marketing. He studied the stories of other founders, the ones who had been rejected dozens of times before their big break. He learned to craft a narrative, to sell a vision, not just a product. He practiced his pitch in front of the cracked mirror in the garage's small bathroom, refining his delivery, learning to anticipate objections. He was no longer just a coder. He was becoming a strategist. He also found an unexpected ally in Mrs. Gable. One evening, she brought him a plate of homemade cookies and sat with him. "I don't understand all this computer talk, Leo," she said softly, "but I see the fire in you. The same fire you had when you first came here. A scared little boy determined to prove he was more than his circumstances." Her simple, unwavering belief was a balm to the repeated rejections. It reminded him that he was building for a reason that went beyond profit. The breakthrough came from a forgotten corner of the internet. A small tech blogger, Chloe, stumbled upon a beta version of Aether that Leo had quietly released. She was struggling to manage her small business and her chaotic personal life. She downloaded Aether on a whim. A week later, she published a glowing, heartfelt review titled, "This unknown app just saved my sanity." She detailed how Aether had intuitively sorted her invoices, reminded her of her mother's birthday, and found the most efficient delivery routes, saving her hours each week. The article went viral in niche online communities. Suddenly, Leo's makeshift server was straining under the load of thousands of new signups. His inbox flooded with messages from users praising Aether's simplicity and power. It was organic, genuine growth, born not from a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign, but from a product that truly delivered. For the first time, the world was validating him, not the other way around. With the user base growing exponentially, Leo knew he needed help. He couldn't manage the servers, the customer support, and the development alone. He needed a team. His first hire was Chloe, the blogger, whose keen understanding of user experience and passionate communication made her the perfect head of community. Next was Ben, a brilliant, self-taught back-end engineer he met on a developer forum, who was bored with his corporate job and hungry for a challenge. The garage was no longer just his space. It was filled with the energetic hum of collaboration. Chloe's marketing whiteboard stood next to Leo's product roadmap. Pizza boxes stacked next to lines of efficient code. They were a team of misfits, united by a belief in Aether's potential. Leo learned to delegate, to trust, and to lead. He was no longer a lone wolf, He was the captain of a small, but fiercely dedicated, crew. The email from Mr. Sterling's firm was a shock. The subject line read, Aether proposal. Leo's first instinct was to delete it, remembering the condescending dismissal. But curiosity won. The tone was entirely different. Mr. Cruz, it began. We have been following Aether's remarkable growth with great interest. We believe our initial assessment may have been premature. Would you be open to a follow-up discussion? The rejection had stung, but this sudden interest felt even more dangerous. Leo, Chloe, and Ben prepared for the meeting like generals for a battle. This time, Leo was not a desperate boy with a dream. He was a CEO with a proven product, a growing user base, and data to back up every claim. He walked into the same glass-walled conference room, but he was a different person. He spoke not from a place of need, but from a place of strength. He wasn't asking for their approval. He was offering them an opportunity. The offer was staggering. Sterling's firm offered a term sheet that valued Aether at an amount Leo had only seen in tech news headlines. It was enough to secure the garage for a year, hire a dozen more engineers, and launch a proper marketing campaign. Ben was ecstatic, already mentally spending the money on server infrastructure. Chloe, however, was cautious, her blogger's instinct sensing a trap. They didn't believe in us then. Why now? She asked, her eyes fixed on Sterling's smug, satisfied smile. Leo felt the pull of the money, the validation, but Chloe's warning echoed his own deep-seated distrust. In the end, the weight of responsibility for his team decided it. He looked at Ben's hopeful face and Chloe's worried one, and knew he had to secure their future. He signed the term sheet, his hand steady, but a cold knot formed in his stomach. The handshake with Sterling felt like a pact with a different kind of system, one he had vowed to dismantle. They had won, but as he left the building, the gleaming glass and steel felt less like a trophy and more like a gilded cage. The influx of capital was transformative. They moved from Mrs. Gable's garage to a sleek, open-plan office in a trendy part of the city. Leo stood at the glass window of his new corner office, looking down at the city that had once rejected him. He had done it. He was a CEO, but the reality was a whirlwind of new pressures. Board meetings, financial reports, and relentless pressure to scale faster, monetize more aggressively. The quiet, focused coder was being buried under the persona of the visionary founder. He found himself repeating phrases he'd heard in investor meetings, leveraging synergies, maximizing ROI, disrupting the market. The pure, helpful purpose of Aether was being slowly twisted into a tool for data aggregation and targeted advertising. Ben thrived in the chaos, but Chloe grew distant, arguing that they were betraying their core users. Leo, trapped between his dream and his duty, made a fatal compromise, approving an update that made user data collection mandatory. It was the first crack in his foundation. The backlash was swift and brutal. The update rolled out, and within hours, the very online communities that had championed Aether turned against it. Aether sold US out, screamed a headline. From savior to spyware, declared another. User uninstalls skyrocketed. Chloe slammed a printed stack of angry user reviews on his desk. I told you, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. We built trust, and you traded it for data points. Leo's phone buzzed incessantly. It was Sterling, demanding to know how he was going to contain this PR disaster. That night, Leo sat alone in his expensive new apartment, the silence more profound than any he'd experienced in the garage. He had gotten everything he thought he wanted. Money, status, power. But he had never felt like more of a failure. He had outmaneuvered his rejectors only to become a version of them, prioritizing growth over integrity. The empire he built felt like it was crumbling because he had built it on shifting sand, not the bedrock of his original vision. The board meeting was an execution. Sterling and the other investors sat across the table, their faces grim. User growth has flatlined, trust is eroded, and your CMO is in open rebellion, Sterling stated coldly. The current leadership is no longer instilling confidence. We are proposing the installation of an experienced, interim CEO to right the ship. It was a coup. They were going to push him out of his own company. Leo looked at their impassive faces and saw Havisham's ghost in every one. They were going to take his kingdom. But this time, the fire of defiance did not ignite slowly. It exploded. He stood up, his voice low but cutting through the room like a blade. "You bought a share of my company, Sterling, not my soul," Leo said. "You saw Aether as a product to be mined for profit. I see it as a promise to the people who believed in it when it was just a dream in a garage. I am still the architect here." He walked out, not knowing if he still had a company to return to. He found Chloe at her apartment, packing her boxes. "I can't be part of this anymore, Leo," she said, not meeting his eyes. He didn't try to stop her with promises or pleas. Instead, he showed her his screen. It was a blueprint for Aether 2.0. A complete architectural overhaul. No mandatory data collection. A transparent, open-source core. A subscription model that respected user privacy. "This is what we should have built from the start," he said, his voice raw. "I was wrong. I need your help to make it right." Chloe stared at the schematics, her resolve visibly softening. Meanwhile, Leo called Ben. "The board is trying to oust me. They'll come for you next. Promise you the moon to side with them." Ben was silent for a moment before replying, his voice steady. Meanwhile, Leo called Ben. "The board is trying to oust me. They'll come for you next. Promise you the moon to side with them." Ben was silent for a moment before replying, his voice steady. "I didn't sign up to work for suits, Leo. I signed up to work for you. The garage was more fun anyway." Leo had his generals back. The real battle was about to begin. The Aether betrayal story was the lead on every tech blog, but Chloe masterfully pivoted the narrative. She published a raw, honest post titled, "Our Mistake and Our Promise," outlining the failed update and detailing the vision for Aether 2.0. She didn't hide from their failure, she weaponized it, framing it as a painful lesson learned in the corrosive nature of chasing growth at all costs. The response was cautious but hopeful. Their core user base, who had felt betrayed, began to listen. Simultaneously, Leo and Ben worked day and night, coding the new version from the ground up. They worked from a borrowed conference room, a small, dedicated team of engineers who believed in the mission, having followed Ben. It was a race against time. Sterling's interim CEO was set to take over in 30 days. They had 1 month to build, launch, and prove that Aether was not only salvageable but could be better than ever, all while fighting a legal and corporate war for control. The lawsuit arrived by courier. Sterling's firm, leveraging their majority control on the board, sued Leo for breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of company resources, claiming his work on Aether 2.0 was a competing asset that belonged to them. They froze the company's remaining funds and served injunctions to stop development. It was a masterstroke designed to strangle them in legal red tape until they ran out of money and hope. For the first time, Leo felt the true, crushing weight of corporate power. But Leo was no longer the boy who could be easily crushed. He used the last of his personal savings, money he had set aside from his salary, to hire a fierce, brilliant lawyer named Anya Sharma, who specialized in founder disputes. "They're bullies," she said, reviewing the documents. "But their case is built on sand. You built the original IP alone, before their investment. We fight." The battle was now on two fronts, the court of public opinion and the actual courtroom. The media painted the battle as the ultimate David versus Goliath story, the rejected student versus the venture titans. News outlets dug up his past, publishing stories about his foster care background and his college rejections. The narrative was irresistible. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a symbol for every outsider who had ever been told they weren't good enough. This unexpected fame brought a new wave of support, including from a rival tech giant, Nova Systems, who saw an opportunity to embarrass Sterling and potentially acquire a revitalized Aether. Amidst the chaos, Mrs. Gable called him. Her voice was soft but firm. "I saw you on the news, Leo. Don't you let those men in suits tell you who you are. You remember the boy in the garage. He knew what was important." Her words were an anchor in the storm, cutting through the noise of lawsuits and PR battles, reminding him of the core truth he had almost lost. He wasn't fighting for a company. He was fighting for an idea. The day of the preliminary injunction hearing arrived. Sterling's lawyers presented their case, painting Leo as a reckless, ungrateful founder who was trying to steal what was rightfully the investor's property. Then, Anya stood up. She didn't just argue legal points, she told a story. She presented the original rejection letter, the garage lease, the first lines of code dated before the investment. She framed Leo not as a thief, but as an artist whose creation was being stolen by bureaucrats. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened intently. When she finally spoke, her words sent a shockwave through the room. The plaintiff's case demonstrates a disturbing overreach, she stated. The core intellectual property, the very soul of this product, was manifestly created by Mr. Cruz prior to any investment. The injunction is denied. Mr. Cruz is free to continue his work. Leo had won the first legal battle. He had the freedom to build. Emboldened by the legal victory and the overwhelming public support, Leo and his team launched Aether 2.0, The Promise. It was more than an update, it was a manifesto. The launch event was streamed live from their old garage, which they had rented for the day. Leo stood before the camera, not in a suit, but in a simple hoodie. He spoke not of market share, but of trust. He apologized again, demonstrated the new, transparent features, and announced that Aether would now be a public benefit corporation, legally bound to balance profit with its social mission. The response was seismic. User signups shattered all previous records. The story of his stand against the VC titans became legend. Within a week, Sterling's firm, facing a massive PR nightmare and a now devalued asset, capitulated. They offered to sell their shares back to Leo at a significant loss. He was free. He was the undisputed CEO. But as he looked at the graphs soaring upward, he felt not triumph, but a profound sense of peace. He had almost lost himself to the power he sought. Now, he had finally learned what it was for. The silence in Aether's headquarters was new. The frantic panic of the corporate coup was gone, replaced by the focused hum of a team united by a single purpose. With Sterling's influence eradicated and the company wholly theirs again, Leo gathered his team. "We're not just building an app anymore," he announced, his voice echoing in the open space. "We're building a benchmark. We will prove that ethics and profitability are not mutually exclusive." The first official act of the new Aether was to establish an ethics review board, with Chloe and a panel of external privacy advocates at its helm. The public and industry watched, skeptical that this noble experiment could last. Competitors whispered that Aether had gone soft, that without aggressive data harvesting, it would wither. But the opposite happened. Corporations, tired of privacy scandals, and individual users, craving digital trust, began migrating to Aether in droves. They weren't just buying a product, they were buying into a philosophy. Aether became the anti-establishment establishment. The invitation was embossed with the familiar crest of Crestview University, the very one that had been on his rejection letter. It was an invitation to deliver the keynote address at their annual Innovation and the Future conference. Ben framed it as the ultimate victory lap. Chloe saw it as a perfect platform for their message. Leo, however, felt a cold knot of old anxiety. The ghost of that rejection still held power. To walk back into that world was to confront the source of his deepest insecurity. He spent a week drafting and redrafting his speech. The first versions were full of thinly veiled venom, a triumphant narrative of "I told you so." But it felt hollow. Mrs. Gable's words came back to him, "Don't let them tell you who you are." He realized he didn't need their validation anymore. He crumpled up the angry drafts and started anew. He would not go there as a conqueror seeking tribute. He would go as a teacher, offering a lesson they had failed to teach him. The auditorium was grand, a sea of expectant faces, students, faculty, and alumni. In the front row, he spotted Mr. Havisham, older, grayer, his expression unreadable. Leo walked to the podium, the silence thick with anticipation. He took a deep breath and began not with his success, but with his failure. He held up his phone, displaying a scanned image of the rejection letter. A nervous ripple went through the crowd. "This letter," he said, his voice clear and calm, "was not my end. It was my syllabus." He spoke for 30 minutes, not about coding or corporate structure, but about resilience. He talked about the garage, not with romantic nostalgia, but with the stark truth of the cold, the loneliness, and the self-doubt. He defined true power not as dominance over others, but as mastery over one's own narrative. He never once looked directly at Havisham, but his entire speech was a conversation with him. He was not the rejected student anymore. He was the master architect, and he was here to lay a new foundation. As he concluded, the audience rose in a thunderous ovation. Students surged forward, their eyes alight with inspiration. They saw in him a path they hadn't known existed. As the crowd slowly dispersed, an older man approached him. It was Havisham. He stood before Leo, his usual stern demeanor replaced by a weary humility. "Mr. Cruz," he began, his voice softer than Leo remembered. "I was mistaken. I judged a fish by its ability to climb a tree. It seems you were not meant for a tree. You were meant to build an ocean." Leo felt no schadenfreude, only a profound sense of closure. The fortress he had built in his mind to keep that hurt out finally dissolved. He shook Havisham's hand. "Thank you, sir," he said, and he meant it. The rejection had been a cruel gift, but it had been a gift nonetheless. In that moment, the last chain of his past fell away. Driving home from the university, a single, powerful idea crystallized in his mind. It was more than a scholarship. It was a declaration of war on the very concept of worthiness that had once excluded him. He burst into the office the next morning, his eyes blazing with a new fire. "The rejected foundation," he announced to Chloe and Ben. "We find the brightest minds who don't fit the mold, the foster kids, the dyslexic creators, the autistic coders, and we give them not just a check, but a garage. We give them what we had." The project became his obsession. He leveraged his newfound influence and a significant portion of Aether's profits to fund it. They acquired a large, warehouse-like building and divided it into individual workshop spaces, stocked with tools, powerful computers, and, most importantly, mentors, people like Ben and Chloe who understood the struggle. It was a university of the real world, built by and for the architects of the future. The first cohort of the rejected was a dazzling array of unconventional talent. There was Maya, a 17-year-old from a remote village who had built a functional water purification system from scrap metal but couldn't pass a standard physics exam. There was David, a non-verbal coder who communicated most fluently through Python, whose brilliant ideas had been dismissed in a traditional classroom setting. Leo walked among them, not as a distant benefactor, but as a peer, sharing his own story of the garage. He saw the same defiant spark in their eyes that he had once seen in his own reflection. He watched as Ben, in his element, helped David optimize his code, and as Chloe taught Maya how to tell the powerful story of her invention. This was his true legacy. Aether was a product, but this foundation was a living, breathing ecosystem of hope. It was the ultimate refinement of his original purpose, to create order from chaos, not just digitally, but humanly. 5 years later, Leo stood on a different stage, accepting a Global Visionary Award. Aether was a pillar of the tech industry, and the rejected foundation had launched dozens of successful social enterprises and tech startups. As he gave his acceptance speech, his gaze fell on a young woman in the audience, intently listening. She was the spitting image of himself a decade ago, guarded, intense, and burning with a quiet fire. After his speech, she approached him, clutching a tablet. "Mr. Cruz," she said, her voice steady, "I was rejected from your foundation's last intake." Leo was taken aback. "I'm sorry to hear that. The competition is..." She cut him off, not with rudeness, but with purpose. "I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here to show you why your selection committee was wrong." She handed him the tablet. On it was a business plan and a prototype for a revolutionary neural interface. It was raw, unpolished, and utterly brilliant. Leo saw in her the same unbreakable will he had once possessed. The rejected was still rejecting, and the cycle of growth continued. He brought the young woman, Ilara, into the foundation, personally mentoring her. The experience taught him a final, humbling lesson. The system he had built, however well-intentioned, could still make mistakes. It could still become rigid, still miss the most brilliant diamonds in the rough because they were buried too deep. He realized his work was never truly finished. The architecture of opportunity required constant maintenance and redesign. He dissolved the old selection committee and created a new, more fluid and intuitive process, led by past recipients like Maya and David. His life's work was no longer a single company or a single foundation. It was a mindset, a virus of self-belief that he was spreading. He spent less time in the CEO's office and more time in the foundation's warehouse, listening, tinkering, and learning from the next generation. He had become the mentor he'd never had, the open door that had been slammed in his face. On the 10th anniversary of Aether's founding, Leo returned to Mrs. Gable's garage. The new owners had let him visit. It was empty now, just a concrete shell filled with dust motes dancing in the sunlight. He could almost see the ghost of his younger self at the workbench, surrounded by the chaotic energy of a dream. He had built an empire from this room. He had faced down corporate titans, lost his way, and found it again, all because this space had given him the freedom to fail. He pulled out his phone and opened the Aether app. With a few commands, he initiated Project Cornerstone, a new, secret company-wide directive. It was a failsafe, a set of core principles encoded into the company's legal and operational DNA to prevent it from ever straying from its mission again, even long after he was gone. He was not just building for the present. He was architecting for a future he would not see. The story of Leo Cruz, the rejected student, had become modern folklore. But the man himself was rarely seen in the spotlight anymore. His power was no longer defined by his title, his wealth, or the defeat of his rivals. True power, he had learned, was the quiet, profound impact of a single, well-placed opportunity. It was the power to see potential in the discarded and to have the courage to provide the tools for that potential to build itself. His rejection had not been an obstacle to his power. It had been the essential, foundational ingredient. One evening, he stood with Chloe and Ben on the roof of the foundation's building, looking down at the bustling workshop below, alive with the light and energy of dozens of Ilaras and Mayas and Davids. They were not his legacy. They were their own architects, building futures he couldn't even imagine. Ben clapped him on the back, and Chloe smiled, her eyes reflecting the lights below. The rejected had not just built a company. They had built a new world, and in doing so, had found not just power, but peace. Decades later, the world no longer spoke of Aether as an app, but as a utility, as fundamental as electricity, a seamless, ethical layer woven into the fabric of daily life, its origins a proud but distant memory. The name Leo Cruz had passed from headline to history book, a chapter on the power of resilient ideas. On a crisp autumn morning, an elderly Leo walked through the thriving gardens of the rejected foundation, now a global network of innovation hubs. He paused by a young woman, Ilara's own protégé, who was intently showing a group of children how to repurpose discarded circuit boards into art. He didn't offer advice. He simply watched, a faint smile on his face. He had learned that the ultimate power of the rejected was not in the monumental victory, but in the quiet, perpetual transfer of possibility. The skyscrapers bearing his company's name were not his monument. This was. The true architecture of his life was not made of steel and glass, but of these moments, the passed-on spark of defiance, the repaired confidence, the blueprint for self-belief handed from one outsider to the next. His story had not ended with a crown, but with a seed, and he had spent a lifetime ensuring it was carried on an eternal wind, forever taking root in the most unexpected and fertile ground. That same spark of defiance that fueled Leo's journey from a rejected student to a visionary CEO is not a rare gift, it's a choice. It's the decision to stop asking for permission to build your future. Your path of relentless growth starts now. If you're ready to transform your own rejections into your greatest strength, then you need to be in the right mindset. Subscribe to our channel, because next, we're breaking down the exact 5-step architect's mindset Leo used to build his empire from nothing. Don't just watch history, go make your own. Hit subscribe and turn your rejection into your direction.